Hi there and welcome to this lecture about the Vikings. My name is Marcus Henriksson and I'm a history teacher here in Sweden. What do most people think of when they hear the word Viking? Well, some people think about soldiers with helmets that have horns on them, but this is not true. Vikings did have helmets, but instead it looked like the picture on the right. What do the word Viking mean? Well, nobody knows for sure, but there are different theories. One theory is that it means going Viking, which basically means to go on a raid. It could also mean making a Viking, that is taking a long boat trip. Or it could mean the word cove, which is vik in svenska, Swedish. Thereof the name Viking, that they came from coves. The Viking Age began with the attack on Lindisfarne the year 1793. But there were Vikings before this time, which is known in Sweden as Vendeltiden or Vendel times. And Vendels were basically a precursor to Vikings. But when the Vikings attacked Lindisfarne, they met almost no resistance. They were basically just a bunch of monks and priests who didn't have weapons, but when the Vikings attacked, they got huge treasures with them. Therefore, many chiefs and Vikings here in the Nordic countries, such as Sweden and Denmark, now realized how they could acquire great wealth easily just by plundering churches and perhaps small villages. In addition to this, some historians believe that the Nordic countries such as Norway, Denmark and Sweden were overpopulated during this time, and that this might contributed as well. When the Vikings were so successful at Lindisfarne, this basically created a huge wave of looting and conquest and plunder. But you should know that the Vikings didn't just go to England, for example. They also traveled to countries like France, Spain. The Swedish Vikings, for example, that they instead went east to countries like Russia, Poland, and all the way to Byzantium, today's Turkey. But the attack on Lindisfarne, like I mentioned before, created a lot of opportunities here in the Nordic countries. Mostly chieftains who also wanted to acquire great bounty and loot, and they plundered big cities like Paris in France, Rome and Lisbon in Portugal. Because these raids were so successful, so many people joined in, they got a hold of new boats and so forth. So basically the raids grew in size, from small raids to large raids. And during this time we can also see that slaves here in the Nordic countries became more common. They are called thralls here in the Nordic countries, but they are slaves. So how did the Vikings become so successful? Well, they targeted, like I mentioned before, churches, small villages and so forth, and they could do this and gain a lot of booty and treasure because they were quick in and quick out. They had the help of large boats, also known as longships. And according to most historians, they were basically the best boats of this time. They were extremely fast, and they could go into shallow waters as well, so they were perfect for, let's say, raiding villages and churches that you could reach by going in through certain rivers and streams. And the boats were also easy to transport on land using logs. This way, the Vikings got a hold of large amounts of silver coins, gold coins, and so on. And you can find them here in Sweden, especially in the island known as Gotland, but also Öland. In Denmark, we have found huge treasures, also in some areas in Norway. But they were not only warriors and plunderers, they were also traders. And trade during this time flourished here in the Nordic countries. How do we know this? Well, we have made huge and great archaeological finds, not just treasures, but also stuff like glass beads from Egypt and the Byzantine Empire, glass from, let's say, Greece, and also Egypt and the Arabic countries. And we can even find stuff like jewels, great metal works, and so on. During this time, we have some important Viking cities. In Sweden, Birka, but also a new finding, Uppåkra, that is in Sweden in Scania, in the south. Uppåkra was actually 3 times larger than Birka and Hedeby in Denmark. How did the Vikings show their power? Well, they made so-called rune stones, eller runstenar in Swedish, and according to the text on these stones, we can learn a lot about the Vikings and what they had accomplished during their lifetimes. They usually wrote stuff like, this person went to, let's say, Byzantium and worked there as a warrior or bodyguard for the emperor and made a lot of money, or this guy traveled here and plundered that town, or this guy went here and became a famous trader, and so on. Some Vikings were great explorers, such as Leif Erikson, the Viking who went to America and founded a colony there, in Newfoundland in Canada. But you should know that there were both Danish and Norwegian Vikings who colonized huge areas, such as Iceland, Greenland, and much of Great Britain. The Swedish Vikings, like I mentioned before, instead went east and founded countries like Russia and Poland. And because the Viking chieftains gained such huge booty and treasures abroad, they could also maintain control here in countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. So the chieftain is at the top, but he of course has a lot of soldiers with him, known as jarls. And in the bottom we can see farmers, but here in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway they were at least self-governing and had some rights. And beneath them we can see the slaves. Here is a really famous Viking king known as Knut the Great. He ruled over Denmark, Norway, Iceland, Greenland, England, and Pomerania. This kingdom that he governed is also known as Danelaw, because Danish law. And we also have Harald Bluetooth, the king of Denmark, in the 10th century, and he has given name to Bluetooth. We also have this famous Viking chieftain named Rollo, who were given control of Normandy in exchange for protection because France during this time was basically attacked by Vikings all the time, and they needed some kind of army to withstand the Viking raids. And Rurik was the father of Russia. Historians today believe that he came from Sweden. In the Viking countries such as Sweden, Norway and Denmark, the household chores were shared between the man and the women. And here in Sweden, Norway and Denmark, the women were given great rights and opportunities. They could, for example, marry who they liked, they could get divorced when and whenever they liked, they could have the same jobs as the men, and so forth. So usually when the men went on raids, the women were given control over the household. So you can often here in Sweden, Norway and Denmark find the women buried with the house keys. And it is also a known fact that female graves were as common as that of men, and as rich in objects as of the male ones. So this shows that the Viking societies here in the Nordic countries were extremely egalitarian and equal. What did they worship? Well, they worshipped several gods, such as Thor, the god of thunder, Odin, the god of wisdom, Freya, Loki, the god of mischief. And they believed that if you died honorably and battle, you would feast forever in a famous great hall of the gods known as Valhalla. So how did the Viking Age end? Well, it basically ended with the arrival of Christianity, which transformed the Viking societies so that they would focus less on plunder and more on trade. But also because of less successful raids. Because after a certain amount of time, cities in Europe build larger walls, bigger, stronger fortresses and castles and so on. So they were not so successful as they were before. The sources I have used for this lecture and video are some internet sites like Wikipedia, but also History by Elisabeth Ivansson, Robert Sandberg and Matthias Tordai, A History of World Societies by John P. McKay, World History, A New Perspective by Clyde Ponting, Vikings, Historical Accuracy, History Buffs, Historical Documentary, Sweden's History by Martin Timell and Dick Harrison, a documentary, Viking Kingdoms, Viking Women, The Dark Ages, and Age of Light. But if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, I wish you a great day. Bye.